Hi, and welcome to Beyond the Pelvis. I'm Laura Haraka, a somatic practitioner, breathwork facilitator, and someone who's been on the healing journey myself. I know what it's like to live with chronic symptoms and feel disconnected from your body, and I also know how powerful it can be when we start to listen, slow down, and heal from the inside out. On this podcast, we talk about the mind-body connection, nervous system healing, pelvic health, and all the messy, beautiful layers that come within learning to trust your body again. Whether you're brand new to this work or deep in your process, I'm so glad you're here. So let's dive in. So welcome back to Beyond the Pelvis. Today, I am honored to have with me, today's guest is Dr. Yonit Arthur, also known as Dr. Yo. She's a board-certified audiologist, vestibular specialist, and coach who brings a wealth of knowledge to the world of chronic dizziness and vestibular symptoms. Dr. Yo is a certified in advanced vestibular rehabilitation and concussion treatment through the American Institute of Balance and is also a certified strength coach. Her work bridges science and compassion with specialized training in neuroplastic and functional neurological disorders, inferential cognitive behavioral therapy, and internal family symptoms. And what makes Dr. Yo truly unique is not just her expertise, but her heart. She's committed to making the information widely accessible, offering hundreds of free educational videos on her YouTube and comprehensive free course on her website to support those navigating invisible and often misunderstood conditions. Welcome to the podcast.
Wow, Laura, that sounds wonderful. Who is this Yonit person you're talking about? She sounds so accomplished.
Well, she definitely is, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with her today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. As we were chatting about before we came on, I find myself perpetually surprised by the things that I've done because it all really just started from working one-on-one with people who needed my help and then realizing I didn't have the tools to help them and just slowly acquiring more knowledge and then realizing they need me to repeat myself a lot, so I better put it in video form so I don't have to keep repeating myself. And so here we are today. And again, it's just so gratifying to hear everything that you just said. Thank you. What a beautiful introduction.
And it's so interesting, right? How we don't take in all these wonderful and awesome things about ourselves on a daily basis.
Very true. Very true.
And it's nice to remind ourselves sometimes, just the same way we remind our clients who are suffering with neuroplastic symptoms that it's just a part of what they're going through, not of who they are.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So I'm wondering if you can just share a little bit about yourself, who you are today, and what brought you into this space. How did you get into this?
Yeah. Yep. So we all have stories, right? The hat that I'm wearing today under the steady coach, Dr. Yo, I am an audiologist by profession, as you mentioned in your introduction. And I've worked in many different settings and had a big career crisis back in 2018. Really had kind of been building up from graduate school, really, when I started to realize I went into this to really help people. And really what I'm going to be doing is putting people on an assembly line as a diagnostician. And I really love audiology and I love audiologists. And I felt that I wasn't being prepared to actually use the knowledge that I gained in graduate school and all the skills that I had to actually really make a difference for people. So that just kind of built up over time until it just caused me to crash and burn, essentially. I went through a period of a lot of physical symptoms, unsurprisingly, a lot of anxiety, which was not typical for me. And in 2018, I quit audiology dramatically, at least in my head. I don't think it was dramatic on the outside, but inside it felt very dramatic. And I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to go become a personal trainer because that is going to actually help people. The contract is going to be very clear. Like they come to me for exercise and I give them exercise and then they're going to be happy. But there were just a series of personal events in my life, and as well as my own growth process and my own physical symptoms that sort of caused me to come back and take a second look at all of this. And I can't say that there was a single eureka moment when I was like, I can help people. But that was kind of developing over some time till I finally realized if I want to help people, I actually really do have the skills and training to help them. I may need to go back and learn more things, and I certainly did. I enjoyed that. But I actually can help people. It just can't be in a conventional setting like I have been in thus far in my professional career. So I eased into it a bit. I got some extra education, and clients started finding me. I was working as a contractor at a neurologist's office, at a PT's office, and these folks with chronic dizziness problems, PPPD, MDDS, vestibular migraine, started just finding me. And I'm not even sure how they found me. I'm sure I was listed in a directory somewhere, one of these places where I did some extra education, but it just kind of started to snowball. And I realized those first clients taught me all the things that I didn't know. They started to make me realize how much space there was between what I did know and what I didn't know. The Dunning-Kruger curve that people talk about, like you think you're an expert and then suddenly you realize I know nothing. I know absolutely
Exactly.
nothing, right? So thankfully, I've never been afraid of a challenge, like learning new things. I love learning new things, and I'm willing to learn on the go. So I just let my clients teach me, and I filled in what I didn't get from them via education and started making YouTube videos because they just needed a lot of repetition from me. So that's how this whole thing got started. And now I think the most important thing that I do is provide free and low cost education to people with chronic dizziness. Over 20,000 people have taken the free course thus far, and I hear from countless people that I've been able to help just by giving them the information that they were missing. But I also work as a coach one-on-one and in groups. I have a coaching group, and again, primarily work with people with these chronic vestibular or dizziness symptoms.
Yeah, I think that's so important because over the years, I spent thousands and thousands of dollars on healing what I thought was a physical condition. And now it's been my intention to give people free resources every day on Instagram, little somatic tools, little breath works, little mind body tips so that people can access things if they don't have the financial resources to gain this knowledge. And even in my membership, which is extremely low cost as well. But I'm wondering if we could back up for a moment. And you said you had a lot of physical symptoms at one point in your life. And I'm wondering if you feel okay to speak
Yeah.
about them a little bit
Yeah.
and what they were.
Yeah, too many to list here, really, which I want to just normalize for a second and just say this is part of the human experience for people to have physical symptoms in response to emotional or physical or mental events. But for me, the ones that really, I guess, really stopped me or really made me pause, in graduate school, I had horrific gastrointestinal symptoms and also skin allergies. So, I mean, at some point, I thought something was horribly wrong with me, but I was a very poor graduate student and I could not afford to get treated. And back then, life was moving at a different pace than it is now. So, and again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not really prone to anxiety. So I think that saved me at that time. Things were busy. I didn't have money anyway. So I was just kind of like, well, I'm just going to have to learn to deal with this. And I did all these elimination diets. I thought I had a problem with gluten. And what was really actually happening was I did an independent study that made me feel a lot more optimistic about my career. And that's what I think retrospectively, that's actually what not resolved, but mitigated the symptoms enough that I could just keep going. So that was one big thing that just kind of tapered off as I launched my career, and I was very busy and I was very distracted by my career, and there was a lot of fun learning going on. I love to learn. I felt more optimistic about how things were going to go, and then the symptoms were relatively mild. But then, as I mentioned, I think it was around 2018. I think the back pain started in 2016. I developed chronic back pain, and as many of us do. And I also had chronic migraines. And the two of those things together just ramped up in intensity to the extent that I was really trying to manage my life around them. I mean, it was like they were kind of central, and then the rest of my life was like little pieces that I had to arrange around those symptoms. Again, thankfully, because I'm more of an externalizer than an internalizer, that caused me to just be like, okay, there's something wrong in my life and I need to stop doing what I'm doing. And again, I think retrospectively, that's also what helped mitigate the symptoms and help me get through them and reduce the intensity without realizing that I was actually listening to what my body was telling me. My body was saying stop, and I did.
How did you know that? Why didn't you go down the rabbit hole of going to maybe orthopedists or acupuncturists or chiropractors for your back? And maybe you did, but I'm
That
just
is such a great
curious,
question.
what
Yeah.
made you realize that this is not something physical and there was
Yeah.
something that had to change in your life?
So I think some of this was unconscious. I don't think that I realized at the time that this is what it meant. I think I probably had the causality reverse, like, oh, I can't handle it because these things are going on, so I'm going to change things. But I also had this strong, like I said, this strong sense of anxiety, like things are not right, things are not right. I must change what's happening in my life right now. But I think also, to be quite honest, I had a lot of mistrust in the medical system already at that point. I think I had a, let's put it this way. I had thought about going to medical school. I was actually originally planning to get a PhD. And I don't mean to speak poorly of people who go do either of those things. Thank goodness for you. We need you. But I had a bit of a moral revulsion when I saw behind the curtains, like what that actually looked like in practice. It felt morally injurious to me. And so again, this was not conscious at the time. I wasn't like, oh, I don't trust doctors, and it's because there was like, I think it's morally injurious. It wasn't like that. This is retrospective, but when I think back on it, I think it's because I already was so disillusioned by what the medical system would be able to provide me. I already sensed, I think deep down, this was not something a doctor was going to be able to help me with, that this was actually something that I was going to need to take responsibility for, maybe for better or for worse, right? Sometimes still taking too much responsibility for things isn't good either. But it felt to me at the time like this is something I need to face. And I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it's something I need to face in some way.
You know, it's going to take time, is something I've realized, for the medical community to catch up, right? It really is, because I used to get angry when I would reach out to different doctors in pelvic with that deal with pelvic issues and say, look, this is what happened to me. I have to tell you, and let me just come share my story to give people hope. And they're like, what are you talking about? So I came to the conclusion that it takes time to learn things. And when I first learned about this, I was like, this is nuts. You're crazy. There's something physically wrong with me. So it must be difficult to, as a physician, to go through medical school,
Huge.
be taught something our whole entire life, and then say, there might be another way out. There might be another cause for physical symptoms. So that helped me adjust and lower my judgment. And then I just keep trying.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I don't think that's what this is. I believe deep down, physicians, other medical professionals, people go into it to help people. They do. It's just at some point they reach a crossroads where they either have to be, in order to survive, they have to be, gosh, willfully blind. And some of it may be truly ignorance, but I really have a hard time believing that, because doctors are so smart. People who go into these kinds of professions are very smart and perceptive and caring, and often, I think, very sensitive people. And I think at some point you have to make a decision. I'm going to just do this anyway. And yes, it's not perfect, but I'm just going to kind of set that stuff to the side and do my job, because there is something really good about doing my job. And I respect that, but I couldn't do that. I just couldn't. With everything that I knew and I was seeing, I just could not push that stuff to the side and say, I'm going to help people in my way, in my lane, and pretend that other stuff doesn't exist. It just, I could not do that. It wasn't workable for me. And I think that's what the back pain and digestive problems and skin allergies and again, migraines, these were just some of them. There were other wilder ones. I had my jaw locked shut for a year. Like I couldn't open my mouth to eat. I had to cut food up into tiny little pieces. Again, I think that my body was very clearly saying this to me. And thankfully, because I had maybe just a little bit of a rebellious streak or just maybe a little more understanding of what was going on underneath, I was willing to listen rather than go down the medical route.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about a deep knowing and a listening
Hmm.
to our bodies,
Yeah.
which is extremely helpful. And I've had some of similar symptoms for you. I had a problem with my jaw for months where I could barely open it. I've done all the diets, I've had migraines, I've had back pain, and my biggest one, as people know, was pelvic pain.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Well, and I want to say this is where dizziness can be so difficult. And I certainly can't speak with the authority that you have on pelvic pain. And maybe it's similar, but dizziness is obviously so disorienting and so distressing. Every part of your body is screaming at you. There is something horribly wrong. And then it also has cognitive effects because you're often dissociated and depersonalized and disoriented. You also often have brain fog and difficulties thinking, and your short-term memory is not working the way that it usually does. So many people get caught in this very medicalized view of dizziness just because of the nature of the symptoms. And I don't know, to be honest, if it had been dizziness, I don't know that I would have been able to listen to my body or whatever. I might have listened to my body all the way to the emergency room and then gone to 15 different doctors. So I think about that a lot, that I think the healing process is the same regardless of which symptoms someone has. But I do think that some of these symptoms are more challenging than others, especially in that initial leap that you have to make. Like, there's nothing actually physically wrong with me that explains these symptoms.
of course. So I'm curious, how do you help people realize that dizziness is neuroplastic? And how do you help them that's unique to you as opposed with other symptoms?
Yeah. So I think obviously the first thing we want to do is just rule out a medical problem. I mean, that's obviously. And then people just need to understand the two most important principles of sensory perception. One, predictive coding, that our reality is our brain's opinion and its best guess at what it thinks might happen. And that means it can erroneously or accidentally create all sorts of symptoms if the sensory information is just not quite matching what the brain is predicting. And then the second principle, of course, is the fact that we have a threat response, and that the purpose of our brain, the entire purpose of it, is to keep us alive. And so your brain cares very little about accuracy or comfort. It cares about survival. That is the number one thing. And if it's concerned that you are actually under threat, it is, again, not really concerned about you feeling uncomfortable because you're rocking or swaying, or you see weird, visual vortices where there aren't any. It doesn't care about that. It just cares that you are safe and surviving. So once people understand those two principles, I think it's obvious. It's obvious, especially combined with the extensive medical testing that many of them have had that shows that there's nothing wrong, as well as the inconsistencies that they sometimes see in their symptoms. This is similar to pain, that there's nothing really that can explain symptoms like these other than a brain prediction issue, a neural circuit problem. And then I make the case very simply that brains are plastic and brains are constantly adapting. And if you can adapt into this situation, you can adapt out of it. It just requires you to figure out where the sticking points are, what's keeping this cycle going. And again, that comes back to the threat response. So this, I'm sure, is going to sound very familiar to your listeners, because this is exactly what we talk about with pain, although you may use different language.
Right. No, the language is actually extremely similar. The first step is obviously ruling out a physical issue. And even now, I help people with bladder issues and different types of pelvic symptoms. And one of the things I will always do is make sure we've ruled out the physical. We want to make sure there's no infection. We want to make sure there's no blockages or tumors. And then once we realize that everything is okay, let's go into the education.
Yeah.
So people can understand.
Yeah. Yep. And that's probably the most important thing that I do. And you asked what's unique to me. I think it's just the fact that professionally, I am an audiologist. I'm extremely knowledgeable about vestibular conditions. I can explain in great detail why someone has a specific symptom. I can explain in great detail why an anomaly that was found on a medical exam does not explain why someone has chronic symptoms. I am willing to say that may be true, but we don't know for sure, because I actually really thoroughly understand the subject. And I think people find that to be so safe. I mean, it makes them feel so much safer to know I'm not just saying, "Oh, I have this inkling that these things are connected and this is why, and here it is in layman's terms." I can go into the research if we need to. So I think that's one thing that I really help with. But also, one of my crusades is helping people differentiate dizziness from some of these other conditions, because each one has, they're, again, all umbrella, all the same. Everything that you talk about will be helpful for people who are dealing with neural circuit dizziness or any other symptom. It's the same principles, but using specific language that relates specifically to someone's specific experience, and that also recognizes some of the small anomalies that feel really big when someone's actually going through it. That's important. So, for example, dizziness brings up naturally, even when it's not a neural circuit problem, a ton of anxiety. And we're not talking about like obsessive thinking necessarily, just that. I'm talking about like fear, existential dread, and terror. You feel that in your body when you don't know where you are in space. That's just it's a natural physiologic reaction. So people who have other symptoms sometimes just don't have that dimension to their condition. And mind body coaches, who again are very familiar with the general framework, may not know what to do with that particular dimension of the symptoms. For example, so because I work almost exclusively with dizziness and visual symptoms and derealization, visual snow syndrome, like a lot of these conditions that tend to bring up some of that terror, I think I have a way of making sure people know that their experience is normal, and also giving them specific tools for working with them.
Yeah. It's so true. I love that you brought that up, because we might teach the same pain neuroscience, but some symptoms are different than other
They are.
symptoms.
They are.
They just are.
Yeah, they just are.
And I'm not negating anybody's symptoms out there who has back pain or arm pain. I'm not. But as far as pelvic pain goes, there's such a vulnerability with that part of the body. So
Yes.
that's the other dimension with
Yes.
pelvic pain.
That's right.
And the other thing I am finding, since I've worked with people with pelvic pain since 2019, is there is a tremendous fear that comes up with that as well. And through my education of somatic experiencing, I'm able to help people work through the fear, because fear is a major issue. And I can see that the same with not knowing your place in space. That is a very scary thing.
Yes. Yes. It's just different from, again, I speak as someone who had gastro symptoms and back pain and migraines. Those are very unpleasant symptoms, but they don't bring up existential terror the way that some of these other symptoms do. And it needs to be met, as you said, and people need to have tools specifically designed to help them deal with that and the fallout. Because when someone has fear, not only, it doesn't just result in this existential in the body fear, it also tends to result in a certain kind of thinking. And sometimes that thinking takes over as well. And then it starts feeding back into the fear. And then you end up with this existential fear in your body. And then, like, basically what I often will call neural circuit dizziness induced obsessive compulsive disorder. So people who've never had anxiety before suddenly find themselves with intrusive thoughts and symptoms that are just, cognitive symptoms that are terrifying to them. So again, without the understanding that you and I have, that this is all, again, we can all say, yes, it's all part of the same syndrome, but you and I really can see how the symptoms lead to this cascade of other symptoms. It's easier to meet people in that place and give them specific tools. And so your training is in somatic experiencing. I use a lot of different tools as we all do, but I often will approach things in terms of internal family systems. So in terms of parts work, that's also very much in the body, very experiential, very much like working with what's here. And I have found it to be tremendously helpful when I can first give people a map of like what's going on, and then help them start to get clarity on how those different parts of this this map show up in each moment, in each one of their moments of experience, rather than just this big like vortex of like anxiety and fear and symptoms, and they're just like stuckness. Probably similarly, again, you may explain this differently, but similarly to what you probably do, I help people make sense of what's going on, and then we can, once we've deconstructed it a little bit, we can work on each component.
Exactly. Exactly. And yes, and again, we're not negating migraines or stomach issues or back pain in any way, shape, or form. It's just the amount of fear and the
Yes.
vulnerability of certain things can affect how we heal from this. And having someone that understands it can be extremely helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right.
So I'm kind of curious. So when I help people with pelvic pain, I know for myself, and it seems to come up as a common thread in most of my clients, that people with urinary issues, I'll find there to be a lot of fear, not just from the symptoms, but maybe in life. And there's also an anger component, like who's pissing you off kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a big symbolism. And when I think of urinary issues, I think of, and I had these issues, a scared child right before bed, they have to run to the bathroom again.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So for me, I see a lot of symbolism with pelvic pain. Now, that's not to say those are the only two things,
Of course.
but I do look at those right away from the beginning because those seem to be a common thread in pelvic patients. So I'm curious if you're seeing any symbolism or a root cause with your clients and patients with chronic dizziness.
Yes. Yep. And I just want to say here that I'm not putting this on anyone. So if you hear this and you're like, that's not my problem, for me it is repressed rage or whatever. I'm 100% you do you. This is just speaking more generally because I look for patterns, right? Just like you, we look for patterns. So to me, dizziness is disconnection from yourself, and having a dysfunctional relationship with yourself, chronically, um, chronically exiling parts of you, if I were to use IFS language, but chronically uh, having a misattuned relationship with yourself, a dismissive relationship with yourself where you're not accepting all of your experiences, you're not allowing them to be there, and you're living life through kind of a narrow focused like half self where you're only living through this kind of inauthentic persona that you've created for yourself. And I think it's the conflict. So I'll often just say dizziness often seems to come along with internal conflict, but I think it's the conflict between those two things that I'm usually referring to. The conflict between this thing I'm supposed to be, or this person that I've become to survive in the world, and these other components of me that should be honored and integrated and need to be also kind of respected as part of the whole. And this tension just kind of reaches a breaking point, and then we end up with dizziness. Of course, life stressors and all that other stuff plays a role. Would it be okay if I make this really simple though for people who are listening and are like, I don't know, that was just way too abstract to understand what she's talking about? Yeah. So
yeah, absolutely. Let's go into it.
Yeah. So to just make that just very concrete, it could look something like some of the things we identify as traits in the mind-body world that are associated with having neural circuit symptoms. So for example, people pleasing or being like a really big perfectionist. And what ends up happening is people deal with pain in different ways. And some of us develop strategies like people pleasing and like perfectionism so that we don't have to deal with the unpleasant feelings that come up when we're not perfect, or the unpleasant things that could potentially happen if we're not pleasing everyone around us. So that, again, I think that's pretty common in the neural circuit world.
Absolutely.
Right? That's kind of, yeah, that's fundamental.
Kind of who we are.
It's kind of who we are, right? And to an extent, I think all human beings do this. Of course, you can't like I always laugh when people say you need to live a fully authentic life. It's like, okay, but we also live in societies where, we have to get along with other people. What does it even mean to be fully authentic? Does it mean we run around biting people when we're angry? Like, right? So, but I think there's always a tension there between who we really are and who we think we ought to be. And with dizziness specifically, what I observe is people have this like really deep tension between those two things. And what that leads to is them being really on the outside some of the nicest, kindest people that you'll ever meet. And then on the inside, just harsh, cruel, dismissive of themselves. And not just obvious inner critic stuff, although many of them have critics and judges on the inside that tell them that they're not doing well enough. But more than that, just real patterns of suppressing a lot of who they are. So again, I can't say that this applies to everyone, but the outside signs, when we say things like people pleasing and perfectionism, those are traits that are associated with neural circuit dizziness. We're not saying that those are the reasons why you have it. We're saying that is a clue. That is a symptom. That's another symptom. And to me, it's a symptom. People pleasing and perfectionism are simply symptoms that tell us there's a problem in how you're relating to yourself.
We're not being true to ourselves when we're people pleasing, but I found myself very stuck because I couldn't stop.
Yes.
And I didn't know why at a certain point, because I knew it was causing me grief and resentment, but I couldn't stop until I understood why I was people pleasing, why I was trying to put other people before myself and eliminating self-care from my life. And it was due to so many of my limiting beliefs.
Yep. Yes. And I think that's somewhere I've just been really interested lately. We were talking before we got on and I said, I always go down rabbit holes. I love learning new stuff. And I go through phases where I'm reading all these books about one topic and then I'll switch and learn about another topic. And that's one thing I've really been thinking about a lot lately, beliefs. Because sometimes we think, especially in the mind-body world, we talk a lot about emotions and the importance of feeling your feelings. But sometimes those feelings are kind of reactions to beliefs that are deeper down. And if we stop at the level of feelings sometimes and we're not looking at the beliefs that we have that are causing us to have the feelings that we have, then we're not able to make the kinds of changes we want to make.
For me, I needed to understand where the belief came from so that when I was doing it, I can actually pause and go, oh,
there it is.
There it is. And I do a lot of work with limiting beliefs. I actually just taught it this week in the Pelvic Healing Circle. That's my membership program. And if you're interested in it at all, I use a method by Heather Ashamara getting to the limiting beliefs. It's the Warrior Heart Practice.
I'm going to go down another rabbit hole this weekend.
Now I have another rabbit hole for you to
Thank you.
To go down. But it's not about negating or bypassing the feeling. It's about being with the feeling and then understanding the story that's there and identifying the belief. And once that can happen, we can identify some of the truths in the situation.
Yes.
So, for me, I thought self-care was what I had, helping other people was what I had to do all the time to be considered a good person. But then I realized the truths under it. And then I'm able to have compassion for myself and understanding. And that's when I can have where I found true change.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. So you asked in dizziness, like what the symbolism is. I feel like with dizziness, at least from what I see, often the change needs to be more than it needs to be a little bit deeper than I'm not afraid of the symptoms anymore, right? So what you just described is a beautiful way of explaining that you're not going to be able to necessarily make the kinds of changes that are really going to heal you if you're only working from the neck up. And also if you're stopping at, I'm going to learn how to work with my anxiety. I'm going to learn how to work with my symptoms. I'm going to somatic track. Those are great tools and they're super important. And I highly encourage people to use them. And many people with dizziness get better just doing those things. But often, again, because there is this deeper rupture I was talking about before that's leading to some of these things like perfectionism and people pleasing and all this other stuff. If you catch yourself doing those and then trying to change the habit doesn't work, is it just a habit? Okay, cool, change the habit. But if you find yourself like you did, Laura, I'm not able to change this. Like I feel like I'm stuck. I know I shouldn't be doing this. I know it's making me more stressed out, but I just can't stop. We need to go deeper.
I had pelvic pain, as you know, and there were times I did somatic tracking and it really helped. My symptoms started to change, but that wasn't going to be enough to heal me. It just wasn't. I couldn't just say messages of safety and relaxing my body. I'm also a breathwork facilitator and I love breathwork, but I couldn't breathe myself out of it.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean there's not a place for breath work either. I love it as a modality, but I don't tell people when they're feeling anxious or feeling a feeling, let's breathe it away. That's not what was going to happen for me. So I had to dig a lot deeper into why my symptoms were there and what the limiting beliefs are.
In order to change. In order to change. And that, I think that's something worth saying too, that sometimes people get lost when they hear me talk about this, others talk about this, when they're like, okay, I need to like heal my trauma response or something, or like I need to feel my feelings and make my nervous system feel safe. Something gets lost there. Like they feel, it's almost like they see those things as other pathologies that they need to play battleship with. Like, okay, I'm going to like get this emotion and boom, I'm going to sync it and then we're going to feel it and we're going to process it and boom, everything's going to be good. We're trying to take it, we're doing all of these things, not just to like do them, not just to release energy into the universe or something.
Right.
We're doing these things because we're trying to help you change your relationship with yourself as well as the relationship with your symptoms. And the only way to really do that at a deep level is what you're describing.
Yeah. So this hasn't been something that I just did to help myself heal from pelvic pain. This is a complete allowance. And I put my arms out like this because that's really what it is. It's a surrendering and an allowance to connecting to myself and being with everything that's there. And even now, and people ask me, some other coaches don't, they don't have a maintenance plan, but I do. And every day I just say to myself, what am I feeling? And I allow it.
Love that. I love that. And you know what? Bless the people who don't have a maintenance plan, but I have just been flat out telling people you are going to have to change how you live your life, period. It is just going to have to change. And people do not like hearing that. And I don't put that up front on, YouTube video number 1. Congratulations, you have PPPD. You're going to have to live a different life, right?
Exactly.
That's not very helpful. When I say that, I don't mean a life of limitation and fear and stress and having to constantly work around symptoms and take medications. I mean, something wasn't working for you. That's how we got into this problem in the first place. Something about the way you were living your life before said, set your nervous system off and said, no, we're not doing this. I'm in danger. I'm not safe. And so if we just go back to living that way, then what do we expect from ourselves? So I think that shift into, we don't have to call it maintenance. We can call it living better or something. Maybe that's a better marketing term for it. Living better.
Yeah.
But like you, I don't live my life the way that I used to live my life. I can't. I know that it's not just that I can't, Laura. It's not that, the symptoms are going to come back or something. No, it's not that. It's just like I would not treat my child that way. I respect myself too much to go back to living the way that I used to live. And living that way didn't work for me. It wasn't serving me. And I know myself and love myself more now. So I'm not going to live that way anymore because I love myself. And that's what I'm hoping people get as they leave and they graduate and they don't have symptoms anymore. It's not, I have to maintain this symptom-free state. No, you hopefully get to the point where you say, that wasn't working for me. My relationship with myself was not great. I built a new relationship with myself and now this is what it is. And that's going to take some effort from me.
And I don't want to go back. When I go outside, I don't only have a different relationship with myself, but I have a different relationship with the flowers, with the birds, with the trees,
Yes.
with the entire universe.
Yeah.
I see it now.
It's beautiful.
I hear it now, and I didn't before.
Yeah. That post-traumatic growth, right? Like if you have to go through something awful, like chronic symptoms, then you may as well get some growth out of it. I say that a lot too. You may as well not just be indifferent to symptoms and then get better. No, we may as well get something out of this. You're suffering a lot. So let's get something really good out of this. And you just expressed that so beautifully. It changes the way that you live your life in just the best way. You have so much more of an appreciation for even just the small moments. And those small moments are, I think, what ends up making life meaningful.
Exactly. So I'm just curious if there's anything we missed, we didn't touch on that you really want to add to this conversation and let our listeners know about chronic symptoms and chronic dizziness. Any last words of wisdom?
Yeah. So if you're new to symptoms, then the first phase you have to learn, and there is tons of free info. Laura, you have tons of free info. I have tons of free info. So dig in. And then when you have the info, you need to stop, being a knowledge hamster and getting info. You can keep listening to these podcasts, please, to keep it connected to it. It's good. That's important. But at some point, you need to stop gathering information and start putting it into practice. And this is where people get really scared because their impulse is to go back to knowledge land and just keep learning more. And that's like, it feels like that's easier or more comfortable instead of implementing. That's where you can shift into some of the practices, Laura, you were talking about putting on your Instagram. And small changes, small shifts add up so much. It doesn't have to be huge. Doing a practice like what you put up on Instagram, a small 2-minute breath practice, and using that as a way to connect back to yourself, those are the kinds of things that actually lead to resolution over time. It doesn't have to look like this huge energetic release that took 3 hours and like, now I'm cured. It's an accumulation of small changes.
Small changes lead to big results.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So where could people find you if they'd like to connect?
Yes. So I have probably my YouTube channel is the best place. So YouTube, I think you're going to put the links in the description and stuff.
There, yes.
Yeah. So just search for The Steady Coach. You will find some very embarrassing older videos and some newer videos that are a little less embarrassing, but still good information out there. Also my website, thesteadycoach.com. I've got my free course, and that again, honestly, it contains all the information you're going to need. It has everything in there that you need. It's just that people get scared and they second guess themselves. And then if they need more help at that point from a support perspective, they can consider joining one of my coaching groups. But again, the information is out there for free.
You have been a wealth of knowledge, and I encourage people, if you're dealing with chronic dizziness, please reach out to Dr. O. She's a wealth of knowledge. And I want to thank you so much for coming here today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. Me too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Beyond the Pelvis. If today's episode resonated with you, I invite you to join us inside the Pelvic Healing Circle, a supportive space for deeper healing, connection, and transformation. And if you enjoyed the show, it would mean the world if you took a moment to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Your words help others find this podcast and remind them that healing is possible. Until next time, stay connected to your body, trust your inner wisdom, and keep going beyond the pelvis.